with a guide.
Oops, sorry. Go ahead, Barrie.
But that would be, of course, fought by all the, whoops. I got it.
Barrie, hi, this is Naomi Boak. I was a park ranger there for three years, and
Oh, yeah.
it's almost the same issue with the boats coming in and out because they park on the beach.
Oh, yeah.
And
they don't have to park right in front of the lodge or the visitor center.
yeah, but they tend to, now that there's the water taxi, right? It parks at the beach alongside all the planes. So, and they go every hour. So I don't know. I mean, it's the visiting responsibly is a big challenge. And one of the questions I want to ask you as we go into this.
Well, you can complain about boats, but compared to aircraft, there's no aesthetic comparison. Boats can approach quietly and get on the beach if there aren't any bears there. Of course, the beach is a bear trail to the river.
Right.
So when aircraft tie their tails to the trees, you've seen the picture of the female with a cub on her back swimming around all these aircraft,
Yeah.
What kind of evidence do you need that the aircraft are in the wrong place?
Well, not much for me. I think there are a lot of things that we could do to make visiting more responsible.
Yeah, it's a matter of getting the Park Service to behave, I think.
Yeah.
I'm getting a big Zoom mess here. Let me
Is there
see.
anything I can do to help you with your Zoom mess?
I'll click off. No, I shouldn't have done that.
Well, while you reorganize, I will give a quick welcome to everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. I know we have a couple of new people. I see a lot of very familiar names. Thank you all for being here. Welcome to the regulars. And a special welcome to the new people who have not joined us before. We are glad that you are here. We are especially glad that Barrie Gilbert is with us today. We are just finishing Barrie's terrific book, One of Us, A Biologist's Walk Among Bears. I see several people holding it up, yay. And we're going to talk about that and other things today. We kind of already started talking about everything else today, but we'll get to all of those things. Just a quick introduction for the new people. This book club has been meeting for 17 months. We started in April of 2021. We've been meeting every other week, which is a lot of meetings. We started with Mike Fitz's essential book, The Bears of Brooks Falls. I'm sure you've all read it. If you haven't, please do. And if you have, know that it's wonderful for holiday gift giving. And then after we read Mike's book, we turned to the lyrical and challenging The Dominion of Bears by Sherry Simpson, which we ultimately enjoyed quite a great deal. And we have been reading for the last several weeks. Barrie's candid and provocative One of Us, A Biologist's Walk Among Bears. Talks a lot about bears, talks a lot about humans, talks a lot about Katmai. And if you haven't read this one, you will want to by the time we're done talking with Barrie today. I told Barrie how honored we are to have him with us, and he is already embarrassed by that. But it is true, Barrie. We are just thrilled that you're here with us today. What we usually do for the new people is I will start just by asking some questions about the book to get mostly to break the ice, because clearly this is a very awkward group that feels uncomfortable asking questions to our guest. But after we talk about the book for a little bit, I'll open the floor up to questions, and anybody can ask questions. And I'll talk a little bit about how that works when we get there. If you haven't opened the chat function in Zoom, you will probably want to. Zoom has its own chat. This is separate from the chat with the cams. And you can open the chat just by clicking that little bubble. It looks like a cartoon bubble down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Okay, and the other thing, you guys, is that as you may have noticed, and as I said in my email, we are recording because there's several people who can't be with us in person. So we are recording. If you can still be anonymous, even though we're recording. If you don't want your face to show up, just click the little button down at the bottom that says stop video. If you click that button, your face goes away and your name comes up. And then when you click it again, your face comes up. And I'll tell you how to ask questions without being on screen when we get to that point. Yes,
Stacey,
Barry.
I'm just getting you on a big Zoom screen.
Oh,
and
you
there's
don't-
no bubble that I can find.
So are you on a Mac, Barry, or a
Yes,
PC?
a Mac.
So the bubble that I see is down at the bottom. So one thing you can do is change your view, because you don't want to just look at me, I don't think. You can change your view by clicking in the upper right-hand corner. There should be a little grid that says view next to it.
Okay, let's see. I'm getting support and English, and there's a little bubble at the bottom right. Shall I hit that? Chat with?
Yes.
Oh,
Although that might be chat with help people. Should just be chat. And if there's anybody who knows more about Zoom than I do and who can help more readily, feel free to jump in.
So is he using an iPad or a laptop? That's critical.
I'm
there-
on a laptop.
Okay, so I can't help. I can help.
MacBook Air. I'm on a MacBook Air.
So to change your view, you switch between gallery view and active speaker.
Where do I find that?
I will just say I use my iPad because I've had trouble on my Mac. I think it depends which browser you're using, because some of them you can't do the gallery.
I think, Barry, if you move your mouse or, the cursor, and you will see on the screen on the right-hand side on the top, if you bring your cursor, towards that corner, do you see view? The word view?
No, I see support and English.
Don't
And
click those.
It's a big screen with Zoom in the middle of it.
So Barry, are you watching on a browser, or are you watching in the Zoom app?
I did the Zoom first, and then I put the link in the browser. But let me, I think I'll go into my history and see if there's something else in there.
And you all should know that his computer very helpfully on its own did a Zoom update right before we started this meeting. So that's why it might be a little bit different than what you're used to, Barry.
Okay,
Barry-
I'm gonna try launch meeting again.
Don't do that.
Yeah.
No,
Too
because then we might lose you, and we don't want to lose you.
Okay,
Barry, my only other suggestion, if Zoom is in a browser window, if you go all the way up to the top, sometimes there's, where it says meeting, view, edit window, there might be an extra menu up there.
okay, I'll try that.
If you see, sometimes you got to move your cursor all the way up to the top. If you see
Sure.
view,
Okay, I'll click on that link. No,
So if I think I've got it. If you're at the top and you click on meeting, it says Zoom, then it says meeting.
No, it doesn't right now.
Oh, yeah, see, I use the app and not the browser.
I've got
So
a post attendee Zoom, and that's where I apparently am sitting. I'll click off on that.
So Barry cannot see us. Is that
I
we
think,
see?
I think that's right. I think he's seeing the speaker. I think you're seeing whoever is talking. Is that right? Or are you always seeing?
Yes, I'm seeing whoever's talking in a
Talking,
little.
but not everybody.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm pretty sure it depends what browser you use on a Mac, whether you
Uh-huh.
can get the gallery or not.
well, we can do it this way.
yeah. I think that's probably the best solution because we don't want to lose you.
Okay,
Okay. So let me just start by asking you a couple of quick questions about the book, because we are a book club. And then we'll get to conversations about bears and human behavior and the Park Service and politics. How's that?
sure.
So Barry, tell us why you wanted to write this book. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, I wanted to summarize my experience. I went through a rather radical change, and I thought if I can do it, then other people can do it too. As you know, I was mauled severely, almost killed by a Yellowstone grizzly bear in 1977. And then I got chased around by a bunch of media people that, of course, try to get you to talk gory stuff and make you cry and all that sort of thing. And then I got an opportunity 4 years after the accident to apply for a research RFP, a request for a proposal from Katmai. And they liked what I was proposing. I actually was about to write a paper on their human interactions. And then I got this proposal and I thought, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I should do some research on this viewing site. So that was 1984 when I first went to Katmai and started research in the summer of '85 with a graduate student, and then had 2 graduate students after that there, ending with Tamara Olson, who became the bear manager at the site. So getting back to your question, I really wanted to explain my conversion, if you like, and try to point out that grizzly bears differ in a lot of places. In Yellowstone, if you march at them like I did, they're going to take pieces off of you. And if you're working in a place like Katmai, you're dealing with basically very accommodating, tolerant bears, because the bears there are interested in fish and people don't hunt them, don't abuse them, don't maltreat them. And so I was just stunned by the attitude change that I went through. And I knew quite well that a lot of biologists that trap and collar bears and then follow them from the distance didn't really know that much about bear behavior. In fact, all they knew was about angry bears that have a snare around their paw, and then they dart them. And of course, that is a very angry bear when it's caught. And I've seen places where they'll chew trees down when they're caught in traps.
No.
Small trees, granted, but they're very upset. And right now, I consider that kind of collaring, we've been doing it for 50 years. It's time to quit, because in each case, you're really abusing a wildlife animal. You've captured it and darting it, and then you claim to be learning bear ecology, but what do we really need to know? I think if you look back at the Muries in Alaska, Abe Muri wrote a book in, I don't know what it was, 1946 or something. He started in 1923 watching bears in the wild without any collars. And he was the first one before, you know, people like George Schaller or Jane Goodall to watch carnivores or chimpanzees in the wild without capturing them. And I think the Muri brothers were pioneers in this attitude, but nobody seemed to pick it up. And I thought my book could demonstrate my experience over some 45 years. And I hope to not only affect conservationists and naturalists like you folks, but also professional biologists, to get them to think about using trail cameras and DNA sampling and all this sort of thing, and get away from collaring and following, as my friends say. I think that's a form of animal abuse. Everybody has a story. I've asked people at meetings, at their meetings, you know, what the impact is. And of course, the deniers say there's no effect at all, but the data shows there's a lot of effect of capturing bears. Of course, they're intelligent animals and they know who the abusers are. And we've had instances where people have been killed by bears that have just been collared, like that poor botanist in Yellowstone that walked up one of his favorite trails, and he ran into a bear that was coming out of sedation and it killed him. And I think the bear didn't distinguish between the people that captured it and anybody else. I wouldn't have wanted to be there under those conditions either. I mean, these are large carnivorous animals, so we shouldn't treat them like pussycats. But if you look at another bear book on Yosemite bears by a former ranger, it's called Speaking of Bears. It gives you some real insight into how black bears both adapt to humans and then have a culture of getting food from us. And it just swept through like an epidemic in Yosemite. Mostly because I was told later that the superintendent decided that bears weren't his top priority. And the bears heard this message and said, well, let's break into cars and dig down through the back seat, and that's where the goodies are.
Yeah.
And of course, in Yosemite, there were parking lots full of broken glass and cars that have had their doors pulled off and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, we know an awful lot about their behavior now. It's a matter of getting people to understand it. And I'm currently working with some of the people around Yellowstone. As the bears spread out from Yellowstone, I call them explorer bears, and they're going into places, regions and people's backyards. They've never had grizzlies before, and they're quite upset. But I think it's important that we recognize that we have to adapt. If we want to have the grizzlies, they have to get to their habitat and various kinds of foods. I hope that isn't too long-winded an answer.
That was just the perfect amount of wind. Thank you. What's been the reaction to your book, Barrie? I mean, other than from huge fans like us, did you get the reaction that you expected to get? What surprised you about how people reacted?
I was surprised at how positive the reviews are. I read Amazon and that sort of thing. There are a couple of trolls, you know, that went after me personally, didn't have any idea who I was, and said that I didn't know what I was talking about, and you could go to the internet and learn more than you could from my book. But I think the person had never even seen my book, let alone read it, you know. So I haven't had any backlash from anybody in the Park Service. I worked with the former superintendent, and we presented a report to Katmai, basically lashing them for the quick change around. You know, they spent 10 years and probably $10 million doing their development concept plan, and then they did EISs, and they did everything by the book. And then along came the politics and the money people. And all of a sudden, the Secretary of Interior, I don't know whether it's not the current one, but the one just before. Anyway, she got on board, and of course it was a vote winner for her. And she said, forget that change of plans. We're not moving the camp. We're going to build a bridge that'll take half-ton trucks across the river. And that's the way they went. And I think basically ARO, the regional office of the Park Service, and the superintendents were powerless to fight it. Basically, it went to Congress and the Senate, and the financial aspects of it won over. And to me, I gave a paper, where was it, in Anchorage, and I compared all the bear viewing sites that I'd worked at in British Columbia, Alaska, and to me, the management of bears was the most permissive in Brooks Camp. They allowed people to go everywhere. There weren't guides for groups like at McNeil Falls, where they limited it to 10 people for so long. And it came down to the biologists and the Park Service rangers and the superintendents wanted to do something different, but the people who were making profit from large numbers of people coming to Katmai were making out like bandits, and that basically won the day. If anybody has another opinion on it, I'd like to hear about it, but I spent a lot of time finding out who was making what decisions where, and I ended up writing the report with Ray Bain, who now lives in Hawaii. And he was sold on the science and used the science that my students and I brought forward. But as you people probably know, science and facts don't always win the day in Washington, D.C.
I think for me, and maybe for other people, that's a big takeaway from your book. That, you know, there's science and there's data, and then there's the real world. You know, real world solutions don't always match what
Sure.
data tells us we should do.
Well, and in some ways, it's a question of value. Some people don't mind, I guess, mobs of people walking up bear trails, and closing off the beach to bear traffic. They're interested in the experience, and it's a terrific place. But I'm of the opinion now that for me, I don't want to go back ever again to Brooks Camp unless it's in October or something like that, because I was there in the late 80s, and it was starting to change. That's why I got the research contract with the Park Service. But it just skyrocketed after that. Every year was built up more and more. And Sonny, what's his name, the owner of Katmai, fought our research tooth and nail. At one stage in a meeting, he said, throw the Gilbert science out the window. In other words, he thought he knew more than everybody, but he was playing to his own bank account.
I'm stunned, and personally, I'm heartbroken to hear you say that you don't think you ever want to go back. Can you say, Barrie, when was the last, this is a two-part question, and this is the last question I'm going to ask before opening it up. But it's my last question, so I get two parts. When was the last time you were there? And for the people who may not have made it to the end of your book, if you could create your ideal Brooks Camp, what would it look like?
Okay. If I have my dates right, I was invited to come and comment on the bridge question with Steve Herrero and and someone from Fairbanks, I'm missing his name, Reynolds. And we only stayed 3 or 4 days, but it was starting to build up then. They had built the high level boardwalks, both to the gravelly area, and of course the one at the falls is still there, and they enlarged the bridge, which all were good ideas. I think it kept the people safe. And if I were looking at it now, I would restrict the visitation, as the Park Service does in some places like Zion Park. Everybody has to go in there by bus, and basically have a system where you send your money and you line up, and maybe 100 people can go in a day, and you stay for a period of time. That's the only way to keep the pressure down on the bears. The only other option, of course, which they rejected, would be to keep all the people on the, I don't know whether it's the north or the south side, but the side that has all the boardwalks, and let the bears have the other side. Have no fishermen walking through the marsh in the Oxbow area. Let the bears have that completely. And I would have a trail from the beach through camp that people can't cross unless there are no bears whatsoever. And then let the bears take a shortcut, which they often did past my tent, to get to the river. This idea that they're walking into aircraft on their way to the spit is kind of ridiculous, because they don't really want to be at the spit. They want to be up the river. Of course, in July at the falls, where the fish, fresh fish from the ocean are coming in. And then, oddly enough, I was the first one, I think, to point out that bears can get salmon for 4 months at Brooks River. They get them fresh, and then they get the ones that have clunked their heads on the falls, and then they get the spawners. And there's a bear trail that goes up along Brooks Lake that looks like the Sierra Club put 1,000 people through there. And it's nothing but a bear trail deep in the dirt, where they're heading up to the tributaries of Brooks Lake to catch the salmon when they're spawning. And then they turn around and come back down and get the drifters and all the rotten salmon right through into October. And then in September, October, I filmed them out in the lake duck diving to get the salmon off the bottom. They'd use their feet to kick up salmon, or they'd jump off the bottom and duck dive down to get salmon on the shore. So there are lots of places for bears to get salmon, but the people side of the equation is the big one, and it comes down to aesthetics. Some people don't mind the Disneyland kind of atmosphere, and others want to experience nature more remotely. If you go to Yellowstone, you want to watch wolves maybe a half mile away. They won't let you get anywhere in Yellowstone on wolf current habitat. If there's a den, say out to Lamar Valley, where I spend a lot of time watching bears and a bit wolves, you can't leave the side of the road. The Park Service says that's for wolves, and they have management areas on the streams going into Yellowstone Lake too, where you're not allowed to fish, because those streams are so important to the bears. That's my answer in 2 parts.
That's a brilliant answer. Thank you. And you've also, I think, just opened people's minds to about 10 different areas for new questions. So we've been meeting just for half an hour, and I think what Barry has brought to this meeting and conversation is very consistent with what he's brought in his book, which is candor and data and strength of expertise on a range of topics, from bears to humans to bears and humans together. The bridge, Katmai, Brooks Camp, politics, commercialism. What did I leave out? There's a whole bunch of topics to discuss. So now we'll take questions. You guys, when Mike Fitz comes to meet with us, we keep him standing out in the snow for 3 hours. We are not going to do that to Barry tonight. So we have Barry for another hour, and we can ask him questions about any of the things that we've just talked about. And if you have other questions, feel free to bring them up. For the new people, what we usually do is we don't just start talking, because we're a really big group and that would be chaotic. So we have people raise their hands. You can do that in Zoom, or you can raise your hand in real life. To raise your hand in Zoom, you can use the reactions button down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's a function that says raise hand. If you don't know, if you can't do that in Zoom, fear not, you can raise your hand in real life. And if I don't see you raising your hand, just do this, start waving your hand madly, and I will call on you. If none of those things work for you, you can type your question into the chat. And if none of those things work, then just yell your question out when nobody else has their hands raised. And I will call on people as hands are raised, and you all can help me keep an eye out for raised hands and questions in the chat too. I was going to ask for somebody brave to go first, but Holly Martin already volunteered to be brave. So Holly, I'll ask you to go first, and remember to unmute.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes,
Wonderful. Thanks, Barry, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
quite
My
well.
question is about research methods. I am very interested in hearing more about what is it that you and your students were doing when you were at Brooks River? Like, what can you give us a typical day, or like what's some of the equipment you have when you're monitoring bears? What is it you're taking down to do more research later? Maybe in layman's terms, kind of explain a typical day of a bear researcher.
Sure. Great question. When I started there, I wanted to have a technique of observation from a number of known sites, mostly elevated. I found an old watershed tower that I put up at the bridge, and we climbed up in it and observed. We had data sheets, and the most important part of the technique that I initiated was to have a measure called bear hours per observation hour. So we had data sheets that you checked off the number of people that were there, usually every 5 minutes. But the main thing was you counted the bears within a given area. I had 3 zones, one at the falls, one at the riffles, and one at the lower river. And my thinking was that if someone came back in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, they could look at our reports and do the exact same technique of observations and see whether there was any change, numbers of bears, impacts on bears, that sort of thing. The technique allowed us to, well, first I should back up and say we covered every hour of the daylight in a rolling schedule. You know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we would rotate so that we covered the the 12-hour period in each location. So we had consistent data collection across all the time. And that allowed us to test the null hypothesis that people are having no effect. And we rejected that because we had data that showed that more people that were on the river, in the river, fly fishing was a big deal at that time. And the number of bears went down in midday when the numbers of people were high. So there was an inverse curve. If we got there real early in the morning, the bears had the river almost all to themselves. And in fact, I saw river otters going along, punching clods of the earth, getting amicetes, the larval stage of the sea lamprey, and chewing away at them around dawn. So I just say that as an anecdote, because you see things during most of our sampling periods were 4 hours long. All of them were, in fact. And so we had consistency in location, time of day, time of week, month to month. And it was all observational learning on our part about what was going on. And we also had to do drawings of each individual. We had to learn all of the animals that were on the river in order to see the impact. We're especially interested in females with cubs of the year because they were the ones that were impacted mostly. And we had some experimental data because the owner of the lodge convinced the Park Service to delay the closing for a week. He wanted another week of business. So we were able to compare 2 years with more people. And of course, the bears were late in coming. Some of the females with cubs would not come on the river until basically the camp shut down. Does that answer your question, Holly?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And I think we've seen the same on the cams where bears will show up later in the season, or they'll be there mornings and evenings and not so much during the day. So your explanation there kind of cues us into why we're expecting. I see people posting all the time on chat, where are the bears? And we're all like, just wait longer, a few more hours, they'll pop up, they'll be back when all the people are gone. So, and I imagine you're using scopes and stuff, like binoculars alone wouldn't actually do it for you, right? You've got pretty high-tech scopes and stuff.
Yeah, we had spotting scopes mostly to be able to see the bears details. You know, a scar on a nose would be really important to be able to see. And if you're writing on data sheets, it's pretty hard to hold a pair of binoculars to your eyes and be writing down stuff. So, of course, I'm a one-eyed individual, and spotting scope suited me just fine. The other thing that's interesting, Holly, is the transition when the camp closed. I realized that some of the bears that dislike or hate people come late in the season. And I told my students, I said, we're going to change our attitudes. These are no longer the same bears. They're not tolerant bears. You might run into a really aggressive mother or a mom with cubs that's bringing her cubs for the first time. And we need to keep our nose to the grindstone, smelling, looking, and forget fantasizing when you're going with someone. We always went out in twos in the fall. And I said, if you go out by yourself, which we did on occasion, you got to tell us exactly when you're coming back. And if you don't report back to camp, we're sending a rescue. We're assuming that you're in deep trouble and you need a ranger and a biologist to come and help you. And that we never had any emergencies, but I realized that you can't wait around if somebody's got their scalp torn off. They can lie on the ground for a while, but best to get them to the hospital.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Sure, my pleasure.
Thanks, Holly. Narit, you're up next. What is your question?
Hi, first of all, I loved your book and enjoyed it and learned a lot from it. I have a question that I did write it down so that if I get too excited, by talking to you, I have it written. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read it.
Sure.
The title of the book is One of Us, a Biologist Walk Among Bears. Throughout my reading of the book, I kept on trying to figure out who is the us and who is that one who is part of them, of us. The answer kept changing as in my mind as I was reading more and more.
What did you think it was to start off?
Well, I'm going to just finish my thought here.
Okay.
So I kept on changing it in my mind. And actually, I was thinking, is there only one answer? Maybe there is more than one answer. And obviously, my question to you now is, could you please talk about what were your thoughts behind this title? Who is that them? Us, and who is that one?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, my thought on the title was that one of us, one is theirs, and particularly their culture. Theirs learn a great deal on how to use their habitat, how to interact with other bears. Young bears stay a couple of years with mom, and there's a huge amount of cultural training, we call it these days, just as in chimpanzees and other large-brained animals, pilot killer whales, orcas, etc. So I was trying to make the case that we shouldn't look at grizzly bears like they're one thing and they're horrible and they're fearful and they're like a crocodile that wants to come and eat your children. The media treatment of grizzly bears is pretty horrible and one-sided. I think of the outdoor magazines where the macho male ends up defeating the killer grizzly bear. And when you actually look at it from an anthropological point of view, bears differ very much from one place to another. So one of us means they're more like us than they aren't. And us, of course, is humans, but we think we're so special in how we behave, when in fact we're part of nature and we're just a big white ape that got out of the trees in time, and we'll see whether we're a success or not. But one of us is a request that we look at bears differing from place to place. And I said earlier that bear viewing sites on salmon rivers are very different in their behavior than those in the high mountains of the Northern Rockies, Yellowstone, Glacier Park, Banff, and Jasper in Canada. So we can't treat them all with the same attitude toward them. They're going to vary a lot. And the more we understand that, the better our management of them will be, and our sympathy for their problems, and treating them like, another special animal that we've mistreated for 200 years, trapping, poisoning, shooting, and whatever. And there's still a tail end of that. And that's what I am trying to do with my book, is change people's attitudes. And if they think I'm a tree hugger that loves puppies, that's fine too. Does that help?
Yes, yes. I thought, that probably it is the bear is one of us, but then I thought we're not kind of, oh, wait a minute, we're the best, and they are part of us.
Yeah.
So for a minute, I was thinking maybe the bears say, well, you know what? Let's treat them as if. Sorry?
Eat your chocolate.
Oh, go ahead, Nurit.
Yeah, okay. Maybe the bears say, oh, well, let's treat them as if they're one of us, so they would
Well,
be the
did you-
superior.
Did you read my section about the woman that was walking down the trail and she played dead and the bear walked up to her and went to sleep beside her? That bear thought that people were just another bear.
Exactly.
And that, to me, flipped the perception to an extent.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that by being there just last week, the bears really ignored the people.
Sure.
That's what
Sure.
I
Yeah.
kind of felt.
And the other thing is, we commonly consider dogs or cats members of the family. Some people treat their dogs like a child, and other people that are raised bears treat their bears like Doug Seuss and his bears. He treats them like family. And these are 700-800 pound Alaskan, Kodiak bears. So if you treat these animals, they are smart enough to understand when they're being treated okay, being fed, not being abused.
Yeah.
We get the same nasty behavior from dogs. If you maltreat certain kinds of dogs, they'll turn into people killers. There are more people injured by dogs in North America than anything else. Bee stings, lightning, whatever. It's just a matter of, well, you can use statistics, but it's a matter of values and attitude changes, I think.
Yeah. I would just add one more thing, is that I love the name because it says one of us, and then a biologist walk among the bears. So it's there one you walking among the bears. It's not
Right.
about the bears, but being among the bears, and I loved it. So thank you very much. Thank you for your answer, and thank you for the book.
Great. Thank you.
Naomi, you're up next, and then Kasha.
Hi, Barry, I loved your book and I agreed with everything in it. As someone who lived and worked at Brooks for 3 seasons, and I was grateful every day I was there and learned so much. But was also really, really distressed by the politics and the commercial influence and all the things that you're distressed about, and even about the veracity of the current science that's going on. And so I wonder 2 things. One, do you ever watch the bear cams, and are they of any value to you? And what do you feel we can do to protect the bears and make bear human interaction better? I mean, we talked about limiting, I'd say get rid of the planes, limit the visitors, get people out of the river. But besides that, in terms of, what can we do with the science? What can we do in the future to protect these various and very different environments that the bears live in?
Well, one thing you mentioned additional research. I would like to know whether the bear cams actually increase the number of people that want to come to the river. Nobody has looked at the sociological side of the bear cams. We're so focused on the bears, their natural history, etc. But I've heard people say that they're afraid that the bear cams are so popular that with Americans and people around the world that have sufficient funds to come to Katmai, it's not a big deal. There's something like 889 billionaires in the United States. So we're awash with people that going to Katmai is chicken feed in terms of their budget. The question is, should they get complete access, all of them, and why are they so enthusiastic? Is it because of the bear cams? I look at the bear cams every once in a while to see whether bears are feeding at falls or downriver or what, that sort of thing. It's interesting, but putting it out to the public in general may or may not be useful. If it prevents crowding, people say, oh, I just really love to watch the bears at Brooks, and I get to know individuals, and we have competitions about who's the fattest, which I think is a big joke because it treats it like it's a contest. This is my personal opinion. I'm not interested in how fat bears can get. I've seen lots of them. Obesity is a problem that humans are dealing with, not bears. And they're fat because they have to rely on their fat through the winter den. And there's a whole interesting physiological story there.
Right.
But to turn it into some kind of competition may stimulate interest. That would be the good side of it. But to me, it displaces discussion about what bears are really about. You know, they're not about getting fat. They're really complex animals. They've got one of the biggest brains in the carnivore kingdom, if you like. And a large part of the neocortex is devoted to smell. They have incredible abilities. I've suggested that we use grizzly bears on security lines in airports to test for drugs, because they beat the dogs anytime. But I'm being facetious, of course.
Right.
But it is an amazing story, and I'm in love with the idea of learning more about how bears can, smell food that's a foot deep in the ground, and they're able to detect the molecules that are coming up from whatever's down there. So
I mean, they are incredible. There has been some research done on bear cam viewers. And I mean, the one thing that I will, in my anecdotal experience with visitors, is that the visitors who have watched the bear cams and watched the educational material before they come are some of the most responsible visitors and understand more about the nature of bears, the biology of bears, the behavior of bears, than those people who see a sign in Homer that says, oh, go do some bear watching for a day. And those people are, taking out their iPhones. They come within, 20 feet of a 1,000-pound boar, and they're not looking to see what the bear is thinking. All they want is that picture. But
sure.
Most of the
They're
bear
taking
cam,
a selfie of the bears on the coast. I see a lot of that stuff.
So my own anecdotal experience is that the bear cams, they may send more rich people to the park, which is a problem, but they also make for more responsible visitors most of the time. So that's the positive side.
Well, and you have the recent experience, so I appreciate your knowledge.
Yeah, but then, it's so frustrating when you're there because so much of the human behavior ignores who the bears are and the complexity and how the bears understand us and their interactions. And I always tell people, well, this is the experience with the bears at Brooks, but I can't tell you about the bears at Denali. I don't know
Right.
about them, right?
Yeah. Yes. And when I was there with my students, the people we had the most trouble with were the professionals or the wannabe professional photographers,
Ugh,
because they would be pushing the bears all the time. They would go out in front of them and block them. And we would say, you know, you're blocking that bear. It's heading your way and it wants to pass by. Oh, no, I'm not blocking it. I've got telephoto lens, blah, 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 you know. And of course they were blocking the bear, and the
Yeah.
bear would then go through camp and the rangers would chase it, and it would be a, you know, a bad scene.
yeah, you know, and bears tell you a lot if you observe them. They, you know, I was my first year very amazed at how they would tell us how uneasy they were with us when they were uneasy. I mean, and, you know, I would always like to stress respect for the bears, calmness around them, not yelling at them.
Exactly.
They have a mission, get out of their way, let them go where they want to go.
Well, the last time I was there, I went up with a ranger a young woman who was a temporary, a seasonal, and she just screamed, "Hey bear," the whole time. And I was totally unimpressed with her approach. You know, I well remember a permanent ranger, young macho guy who had a group of people with him. And there was a bear out in the marsh west of the bridge. And he yelled at it. And the moment he yelled in a gruff, aggressive voice, that bear turned right toward him and made a run at him, sort of saying, "Don't you talk to me that way. This is my habitat, and you move your ass out
Yeah.
of here." And he shut down and got out of there in a hurry, because that bear wasn't going to tolerate aggressive behavior from people. And I learned a lesson that day.
Thank you, Naomi, for your perspective.
Okay.
We've got 4 other questions, so
Okay.
I want to move on if that's okay, and then we'll loop back to you if we have time at the end, okay? Kasha, go ahead, you're next, and then Holly.
Okay. Barry, you mentioned a calamity in your book several times, meaning that one day when the salmon run is not so good and the bears become grumpy and hungry, with that number of visitation and irresponsible visitation and bad management and so on, there may be a tragedy. One of the even maybe beloved cam bears like Otis can become the Treadwell bear and attack someone on the cams. My question mostly is the calamity inevitable? But also what do you think would happen in the context of the cams, and can the cams be helpful or not?
That's an interesting topic and a fabulous question, because I warned, I think in my book too, that if the salmon collapse, which they tend to do now and again, you're going to have super hungry bears that will be aggressively fighting for food. So to get the second part of my answer is that if you're going to avoid a calamity, you have to have preventive management. In other words, have a plan for the worst case phenomenon. And if a bear comes in that's very aggressive toward people, you should have somebody that's willing to note that and move with a management response of some sort. The trouble with the Park Service and human behavior in general, especially places like Yosemite with the black bears, is that they respond after the events. And of course, that's too late, because in the Yosemite case, the bears have learned a whole lot of tricks of how to get people's food, how to get into garbage, how to get packs off wires and all that sort of stuff. So preventive management is important, but it's the hardest thing to get Park Service administration to do, because they're oriented to so many other issues that are sitting on. If Brooks has a total loss of salmon sometime, those bears will be pulling the walls off cabins to try and find some kind of food. And it will be pretty horrible, because the population is built up and the bears are an expectation of getting salmon. And when they don't get it, people food is the next trick. And if you are a ranger and you're trying to deal with super hungry bears that won't tolerate aggressive humans, then the campground is going to be a war zone, if I can say that. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Holly, and then Michelle, and then Lori.
Hi, Barry. Thanks for joining us today. Very interested with so much data collected that you did in your study, and you were convincing management and other leaders to move camp. One of the things that I found interesting is that, so much of the archaeological sites are also right there underneath Brooks Camp. Was there an effort at that time when you were presenting your bear data to also show the archaeological sites, and was all of that ignored when they were talking about moving camp, or was it really just only bear data? And then I have a part B question, which is there anything we can do, we being folks on this call, when reports like yours come in or talks about moving camp, to help our political leaders change their minds?
Great question again. I tried to stay away from the archaeological situation, although in the report that Ray Bain and I did, we treated the sacred grounds of the former Native people with great care. And I think I mentioned in my book that one time the park maintenance people were going to put in a step into a cabin, and they started to dig a little hole, and be darned if they didn't come upon a beautiful fired clay bowl. It was totally intact. So, the Katmai ash and Novarupta in, I guess it was 1918 or so, covered up killed a lot of people throughout Katmai and on the coast, and covered up huge burial grounds and artifacts all over. The Native people in King Salmon elicited or initiated some moves in that direction, but it wasn't very well organized. And your interest in getting the Park Service regional office to pay attention is an excellent idea. In fact, I would be happy to mail you one of our reports, which goes beyond my book. But I think all of us need to express our disappointment with the National Park Service's management and protection of those call them sacred grounds, because when you allow sewage and electric lines and everything to be dug into the soil, you're going to no doubt destroy archaeological valuable sites, not to speak of getting into people's their ancestors' graves. There was a lead archaeologist from the University of Oregon that worked on a number of sites up Brooks River, but he didn't do any digs, I think, in the camp area. It was all around the Riffle area because there's some ancient houses there that have bones and a lot of clay objects. I'll end there.
That's fascinating, Barry. And there's like a billion people in chat saying, hey, if you're going to send that report to Holly, can you send it to me and me and me and me and me too?
Sure, if I get addresses, I think I have a dozen of them, and I'd be happy to pay the mailing charges.
That'd be great. Or you could send it to me and I'll make, is it something I could make copies of and send to the
Oh,
groups?
sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
Great.
I'll use my new work copy machine to do that. Okay, I'll be in touch.
I'll mail them to you.
Great, fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
And thank you to everybody who requested them. Michelle, you have a similar question. Did you want to tag on to Holly's question, or do you want me to read what you wrote in chat? I will take it upon myself to read because I just, you had an interesting related point. You said, how you asked about public review. Is there a way to, Barry, is there a way, how can we push for public review of projects like this when they come up?
Well, I think historically that occurred with the development concept plan and the EIS. They asked for input, but despite whatever anybody wrote, the finances and the politicians' interaction, the lobbying that went on, basically wiped that away. You know yourself that you can have 10,000 people write a letter, but if it's about getting livestock off sage-grouse habitat, it's not going to go anywhere because the agriculture industry has Congress by the short hair.
Yeah, thank you. We struggle with this. This group struggles with this.
But you can also ask, though, that they do some research and ask for input, especially from Native people on the site. And if a few people wrote, they'd say, gee, you know, we really don't have sufficient data there. And the regional office has some excellent archaeologists, so they're not short on personnel. They might be short on budgets, but
an important distinction. Okay, Lori, and then Elizabeth and Leanne. I know your hand was raised earlier. I don't want to overlook you if you still have a question, but Lori, you're up next.
Okay, first is just kind of a comment. The more I read about bears, I'm just so amazed at how intelligent they are. It just is incredible. You mentioned in your book, Barry, about observing the one bear eating the ashy muck from the river and
yes.
The self-medication of bears. And I just found that so interesting. I recently read a couple of books by Benjamin Killam, the guy who raises the black bears,
Sure. Yeah.
Hampshire. And he mentioned that seeing his cubs on their walks through the woods eating soil and not understanding what they were doing. And I had a dog some years ago that would often eat soil. So it's just something, you know, the animals are just so amazingly intelligent with what they know to do. That just amazes me. The question I had was, you mentioned that in British Columbia, they outlawed the trophy hunting of bears.
Yes.
Was so amazing. I recently Googled bear viewing in British Columbia and was amazed at how many places there are offering that. But how did the ban on hunting there come to be? How did that happen?
I think it was public disgust with the killing of bears when bear viewing, the last time I looked, there were 30 businesses that have bear viewing as part of their offer to their clients. So I think it was a sway. It was partly the NDP government, I think, which tends to pay more attention to the public than they do to the wealthy classes. And I think people were just fed up with super wealthy men coming in and shooting a bear. I mean, if you make the case that a big male bear can be the focus of photographers and viewers in the thousands of numbers, yet if it's killed by some guy, he takes the cape or has it mounted and takes it back to Texas or wherever. And that's one person that gets to kill that bear. And I think that the difference between the two value systems just overcame them. I think trophy hunting is getting less and less common. And after that well-known lion was killed in East Africa by the American dentist, that made it a worldwide issue about trophy hunting. And these people go in with a guide, and you never know with hunting bears. I've talked to people on the coast of British Columbia, and if they shoot a small bear, they can offer the guide a couple of $1,000s and say, let's leave that one on the ground and just get a bigger one. And who's to see that that's going on? I've seen dead bears on trails, and I don't know how they died, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were just left by some unethical guide, because it's all about money.
Do you think there's still a lot of poaching that's going on?
Oh, no question. I think poaching of various kinds. I mean, some people would kill bears on the shore to fill their crab pots with bear meat, the kind of things that go on. One of my friends did an analysis of the enforcement along BC compared to Alaska. And I think it was something like BC had 1/100th of the coverage that Alaska does. So there's basically nobody out there watching for illegal or unethical behavior in British Columbia. The coast is huge and it's not covered, and they don't have stream walkers anymore counting salmon, and they would also be counting bears. The other thing that's interesting in my book that I spent some time on was this. You talk about the intelligence of bears. The females that brought their cubs to the end of the bridge and dropped them off near all the people, and the rangers, of course, kept the people 10 feet or more away, 50 yards. So the cubs would sit by the bridge and mom went fishing. So I wrote that the female had to know that male bears kill cubs and that she needs to protect her cubs, but she can't stay with them all the time because she has to go out in deep, cold water to catch fish. So what does she do? She takes them to a refuge, which turns out to be a group of people. And she drops the kids off, what the late Charlie Russell and I called babysitting, and then went fishing. So think about that in terms of what the female is cognitively accomplishing. She's got 2 or 3 things on her mind, and she puts them all together and comes up with a solution. That to me is animal intelligence.
Yes. And actually, I think we talked about that during one of our discussions about the book, was the females learning to do that. It's just amazing that they're making some type of connection there.
Right. I think about the earth eating, though, it's still a mystery whether it's to get rid of parasites or whether they're minerals. The reason I mentioned the volcanic ash is that the ash is basically little pieces of glass. So there's no way that that has any nutritional value. It might be killing parasites in the gut of the bear. A bear goes into a den with an intestine full of tapeworms. It's losing a lot of energy because it's keeping those tapeworms alive. And it might be that eating the ash, that female, I took videos of it, dug it out like and had it in her mouth like peanut butter. And I suspect, that's my speculation, that it's anti-parasitic activity. It's not nutritional other than getting rid of parasites.
Yeah, you also mentioned too, people observing the bears eating lots of grasses, like late in the
Right.
season when they're tougher, and
Right.
just kind
Yeah.
of cleaning out their system that way.
Yeah, and we saw fecal masses, scats that were just solid tapeworms that have been evacuated from bears. Whether there was grass without, I don't remember. We used to make jokes about that would be one whole linguine.
We always end up with tapeworms in this group, don't we?
Yeah.
Thank you, Lori, for bringing us to tapeworms. And Elizabeth, you're up next.
Well, I'm a little, have an upset stomach. after listening to that. Well, I
Yeah,
have
sorry about that.
It's all right. We're used to it.
Humans eat soil too. Lots of African tribes have
It
a
was
soil.
a big clump of linguine that got me. Anyway, so gross. So I have a two-part question. One is more technical and about statistics and methodology, and the second one is more conceptual. So the first one, you talked about, how you use data forms and all of that so that people could repeat. So that's the reliability aspect of making sure you have the null case for the null hypothesis, so you prove your research. So what did you do for validity and knowing that what you were doing is what it says it is? Or can you comment on validity and reliability? That's my first question. And the second one is a conceptual one about what you think about buffer zones, because we've also had a lot of discussion about how to protect the bears that we've come to love at Brooks if they should happen to wander out of the national park and into a preserve where hunting is allowed. So the first one is about validity and reliability of your study, and the second one about buffer zones.
Yeah, I'll try to address both of them. The first one is that the studies were theses and doctoral dissertations of my students. So the design went through a committee at Utah State University that the students had, and they validated the approach. And the students had to designate what statistical procedures they were going to use. And then the follow-up was publication in peer reviews that we submitted papers, joint papers with my students, and they were all accepted. We had one reaction that we talked about habituated bears, and we got one's editor said, well, that's teleological. You state they're habituated and then you're studying habituation, and he had trouble with that. But the other kind of criticism they got was that we didn't use any inferential statistics. And I said, no, we didn't, because we weren't inferring anything. We were studying the whole damn population. People missed the point that we were studying all the bears that were there. We weren't doing a subset of them. So that was the question of reliability. Tell me again about the second question.
And the second question comes from your book where you're discussing buffer zones. And you were advocating buffer zones as one technique. And I just wanted you to talk a little more about that because we here have talked a lot in the Bear Club. How do we protect our bears? I like
Yeah.
like Grazer and like, 747 and all these bears we've come to love by name and who they are. They're those individualistic bears that are so fascinating. And,
Yeah.
they're okay when they're in Katmai in the national park, but should they wander into a preservation area, into a preserve, then they could be shot. And so, anyway, I just wanted you to comment on.
Well, your last point about them being shot has been shown most clearly in McNeil Falls. The bears at McNeil are very close to a hunting management zone. And I looked at the statistics from year to year, and they have a hunting season, then the next year no hunting season, then the next year hunting season. And the numbers of bears at McNeil went down the year after they had a hunting season, then they went up, and then they went down the next season. It was an automatic interpretation. The fishing game, the Alaska fishing game, didn't like the inference, but they were clearly killing habituated McNeil bears in the bear management zone next to McNeil. The advantage of Katmai is that it's so large, and I know there's hunting in the preserve, but I don't think anybody knows how many Katmai Brooks bears go over into the preserve where bears can be hunted. I think if I were emphasizing anything, I'd be more worried about the long coastline facing Kodiak Island and people coming over in fishing boats and killing big salmon bears illegally there and taking them back to Kodiak in the fishing boat. And nobody would know that because Katmai doesn't have enforcement rangers on the coast late in the season, as far as I know.
That point echoes those of you who attended the session with Ranger Susan and Ranger Carl, heard them talk about the Wild West on the coast, and I think that's what they were referencing.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, it's 5:25, and I promised Barry that we would end by 5:30. Do you have an addendum that can be addressed in 1 to 2 minutes? Because we do have other questions.
I just wanted to know what he thinks about buffer zones.
Well, I like them because you're giving the bears access to their habitat. It drives me nuts to have Park Service people talk about their zones and people zones, and the bears shouldn't come into camp. Well, how the hell does a bear know when it's moving into what the Park Service considers people zone? They don't make any distinction about where they're going in terms of who owns it. And to try and teach bears that they're naughty if they come into near tents is ridiculous, because there isn't any way that they can be signaled. If you had electric fence or flagging or something like that, and you consistently drove them off, that would be a different matter. But I think setting aside areas where people can't go, it's more people management than bear management.
I love that. Lori, I see your hand raised, and then Artie asked a question in chat that I will bring forward because it is the perfect ending question. But Lori, go ahead, and I will ask you to please be brief because we only have 4 minutes left.
Yes, so this is something I've wondered about since from the very first chapter of your book, and I've been real hesitant to ask it. In Yellowstone, did the park management there honor your request to not kill the bear that attacked you?
Yes, they did not. I'm sorry, no, they didn't ignore it. They carried it out. They realized that it was a close encounter. The bear was just defending itself. It had no intention to eat a piece of me, and we were lucky to have a radio telephone to get a rescue. But the bear left shortly after my student arrived next to me and yelled at the bear from the distance. And the Park Service never tried to find that bear, which was what I told them. One of the rangers, when I was lying there in pool of blood, said, well, if it makes you feel better, we've killed X, Y, and Z number of bears. And I kind of got angry and said, I don't want you to kill that bear. I said, I surprised it. I didn't think there'd be a grizzly bear at 9,200 feet. And I came over a ridge and was moving low because I didn't want the elk to start barking in the valley below, which would ruin our observations. And lo and behold, I ran right into a sleeping grizzly bear, which was quite offended. And she scalped me and tore half my face off.
Thank you for sharing that, Barrie, and for sharing it in your book. Artie asked a question in chat that I think is probably a good final question. She wonders, she loves this book and wonders, are you working on another book? And or are you working on any research projects that you could share with us?
I'm not working on another book. I'm trying to do conservation work with bringing science to conservation with Doug Peacock and some of his people that have an organization called Save the Yellowstone Grizzly. You can look it up and see what they're trying to do. We're trying to change people's behavior to an expanding number of bears. The Park Service in Yellowstone seems to think that their habitat is fine. There are just too many bears. But in fact, the food base in Yellowstone has declined tremendously in the last 20 years. And the bears are going out to find other foods. And they're running into people on ATVs and all the forest roads, and they're armed to the teeth. And so we're trying to get people to tolerate bears in areas where they never were bears. I continually tell people, you're so proud to be a Westerner, and being a Westerner means having mountains and grizzly bears. So if you do away with grizzly bears, you're hardly a Westerner, you're an Easterner who's moved west. But doesn't get me far. Thanks very much to all of you for your questions. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Barrie. For everybody who is enjoying the book, thank you for being here. If you haven't read this, please do. Please give it to your friends. Barrie, it really has been an honor and a privilege, and thank you for sharing the book with us and for sharing your time this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And send
Thanks,
me
everybody.
your address
Thank
and I'll
you.
send you the report. You're
I'll
welcome.
send you my address and I'll forward it along. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Barrie.
everybody.
Thank you.
Holly.